Welcome to a special bonus book club episode of Gaze Reading. I'm Jason Blitman, and this summer, author Amy Jo Burns and I did a group read-along of Abraham Verghese's The Covenant of Water. The book is 10 parts, and we covered a part a week throughout the summer with a group of listeners, and we had a fantastic group thread going on Instagram in the chat. And this is the culminating conversation from that read-along where Amy Jo and I talked to Abraham Verghese all about the book, his process, and so much more. It is important to note that there will be spoilers. So if you're planning on reading the book, I'd recommend reading the book and then coming back to check out this conversation. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, the video of this conversation can be found at the Gaze Reading YouTube channel, which you could subscribe to over at youtube.com/@gazereading. And you could follow us on Instagram at Gaze Reading, and you could listen to all of our previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And you could subscribe and like and share. And if you subscribe, you'll be the first to know when something new comes along. And if you haven't read Amy Jo Burns' book, Mercury, I highly recommend it. Check it out wherever you get your books. And you could also find it in the Gaze Reading bookshop.org page, which is linked to in our show notes. Here's a bit about Abraham Verghese. For those of you who do not know, Abraham Verghese is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and the author of the NBCC Award finalist, My Own Country, and the New York Times notable book, The Tennis Partner. His most recent book, Cutting for Stone, spent 107 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and sold more than 1.5 million copies in the U.S. alone. It was translated into more than 20 languages and is being adapted for film by Anonymous Content. Verghese was awarded the National Humanities Medal in 2016 and has received 5 honorary degrees and is an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He's the vice chair of the Department of Medicine at the Stanford University School of Medicine. A decade in the making, The Covenant of Water is his first book since Cutting for Stone. Incredibly accomplished man. He's amazing, and I'm so excited for you to check this out. And now enjoy this bonus book club read-along episode of Gaze Reading. This could be very casual.
Okay.
As much as I would like to be, I am unfortunately not Oprah.
I'm sure that you're your own legend.
I think that's true.
You
One
are too
Oprah,
kind.
one Jason Blitman.
That's true. Abraham, I'm Jason. That's Amy Jo.
Hi.
Pleasure.
Nice to meet
Good to see
you.
you.
How's your day so far?
My day's been pretty good, thank you. Kind of busy, but I'm at home for a change, so not too bad.
That must be nice.
It is nice, yes, indeed.
How you've been touring for the book for, it feels like, ages.
It must seem like that, but actually, the book tour ended fairly soon. But there have been a lot of one-off events, book festivals and lectures. It's all been great, but it's kind of winding down.
Yeah. Are you tired of talking about it yet?
No, not really. I mean, I'm just intrigued. You write in such solitude, and you're always imagining the moment when a reader picks up the novel. And so I never get tired of hearing what people have to say. I'm tired of hearing myself, I suppose. But I love hearing other people's thoughts. There's always something fresh that comes up.
Yeah, that's good. Because I know sometimes authors, Amy Jo, I'm sure you feel this way too, because Amy's also an author, which is so helpful. To give you a little bit of background of how this came to be, Covenant of Water has been on my list to read for so long. Amy Jo's book, Mercury, that came out earlier this year, was among my favorites, and I connected with her, saw that she was tackling big books throughout the year. And I was like, girl, let's read this big one together.
Lovely.
And so I host the podcast Gaze Reading, and I put it out to all of our listeners, whoever would like to join along, come on down. So we've had this really lovely Instagram chat throughout the whole the process of reading. We've read it over the course of 9.5 weeks. And so it's been this little pocket of people talking about the book this whole time. So that's been really fun.
It's wonderful. That's wonderful.
We were talking about you being on tour and you talking about the book so much and me asking if you're tired of talking about it. Is there anything in all of this time that you haven't addressed about the book?
I'm sure there is. I mean, there are some fairly standard things that people do ask about, but
Yeah.
it's interesting what intrigues people the most. It varies a lot. I think the thing that I wind up talking about the most perhaps is the fact that I began with I think a very daring opening of a 12-year-old girl on her wedding day, which can be very off-putting to the Western reader, and yet for that era, for that time, this is kind of how it was. It's actually the true story of my great-grandmother. But even my grandmothers were married at 12 and 13, and they just became children in a household with many other children. And one of the annoying boys happened to be their future husband, and I'm not sure they even quite registered that. And their mother-in-laws became strangely closer to them than their own mothers, because when you leave the house and you get married, it's a profoundly sad moment. Even to this day, I've been to engagements or weddings actually, and when the bride is leaving her house, everybody's in tears because you no longer belong to that house. You are now part of a new family. You can't make any claims there. And so that's what we wind up talking about quite a bit, I suspect.
Yeah. Backwards for a second, I completely forgot to tell you why this book in particular was so special for Amy Jo to read. Amy Jo, tell him why.
So my in-laws are from Kerala, so my husband's Malayali. And
really?
Yes. And I talked to my mother-in-law yesterday morning. She wanted you to know that she's from Cochin Cherry, and that's, I guess, an area. Yeah. So
close to where my grandparents lived. Yeah.
So she said,
wow.
Ask him if he knows Abraham Chaco, because he's an Achin there. And I said, I'll ask. I don't know.
About 100 Abraham Chaco.
That's what I said. That's what I told her. So funnily enough, there's one of my husband's uncles. His name is Abraham Verghese as well. So that's kind of funny. Yeah. But when I was reading the book, I mean, first of all, I have always loved listening to my own mother-in-law stories about growing up in India. And so reading this book really felt like I was spending time with her. And she calls me Mole. So seeing that at the beginning of the book, it was just so special. It was one of those amazing things where you don't quite realize how amazing it is to see something like that reflected in a book until it is. And then you realize, oh my goodness, I've never seen this anywhere before. So not only, does my whole in-laws, that whole side of the family love the book, but my side of the family loved it as well. My sister was super excited. I was talking to you today. So it feels like this is a joint family thing that everybody just loved the book. So getting to see a life that my in-laws would recognize so beautifully put on the page has been just the best, one of my favorite reading experiences of the year.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, I don't have to tell you that. Maybe your mother-in-law is not like this, but Malayalis, that is to say people from Kerala, can be very critical. The typical story is your mother is there as you're being inaugurated president of the country, and someone turns to her and says, you must be so proud of your son. And they'll say, yeah, but he could have been a doctor. Yeah. So what I was going to say is I was very nervous about how people from Kerala would receive this book, because I'm guessing, unlike your husband, but maybe not, I wasn't born in Kerala. I was born in Africa. I'm not entirely fluent in Malayalam. And so I could just see them say, oh, this foreign-born kid thinks he can write about Kerala. And what has been most gratifying is that many people from Kerala have just embraced the book because it's telling their story, revealing the intricacies of their culture to their friends. And that's been unexpected and quite a delight.
I love that. My husband has a very similar experience. He was born in the States. He can understand Malayalam, but he can't speak it all that well. And So this is a special thing, I think, for him to listen to. I'm so excited. Our kids are young, and I can't wait for them to read it when they're older, because it's just going to be able to say, this is part of who you are.
Well, it's very exciting. I knew about you, but I had no idea about your Kerala connection. Great.
Isn't that cool? It was such an exciting, happy accident. Speaking of exciting, happy accidents, I was telling Amy Jo before you got on, this is now a week for me of having COVID, and it's the best my symptoms have been. And I said, it's because Abraham is a doctor, because when you go to the doctor, that's when your symptoms are least apparent. And so I feel like it's because you're a doctor, I'm feeling my best today. So thank you for that.
I'm glad having some remote effect.
So before we do a deep dive on the book, because, Amy Jo and I and this group have finished the book, and so there's plenty to talk about, but you have spoken so much about books in general, how books led you to medicine, how novels have changed you. There's themes of books in the book. What are some of those novels that changed you when you were young?
Well, I just think fundamentally books are such a magical, and they're magical entities. I don't know of anything in our world that can stop time the way that a book can. You pick up a novel, preferably a big one, and you enter this world, and centuries pass and people live and die, and you put it down and it's Tuesday. And that magic, I think, is one that I really enjoy, and I regret that many people don't seem to have that, as a good, especially men in my profession. Oh, I'm a serious kind of guy, I only read nonfiction. I often hear them say, and I think, what a loss, because to me, fiction conveys a kind of truth when it works. Its appeal is that it's, as Camus said, the great lie that tells the truth about how the world lives. And so I think for many of us, maybe for you guys too, there were seminal novels that helped steer the ship of our life, that helps turn the prow this way or turn it that way. And it was a kind of wisdom you could never live long enough to experience. So you had to get it from books. And yeah, I think that will always remain magical for me.
What you said, there were some seminal ones. What were some of those for you?
Well, I think it's just by happy accident. I was my older brother, who was 2 years older than me, is a math whiz. He's a professor at MIT now, and his genius was apparent very early on. And by comparison to him, I was kind of not a dunce, but I was certainly not an overachiever. I had no.
Okay.
Yeah, I had no.
Sure, definitely not an overachiever.
I had no particular aptitude in the school curriculum. I remember my brother announced to my parents that he was going to be an engineer, and if you're an Indian child, your options are doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure. This is your choice. And so when he said that, their joy was immense. And I remember feeling like I had to come up with something as well. So I said, well, I want to be a doctor. And it sounded as hollow as it was. And then, but I was a precocious reader. I always read. And I think I stumbled onto Lady Chatterley's Lover when I was 9 or something like that.
Oh, no.
This is the pre-television days. You really had to work for your entertainment. And I picked up Of Human Bondage because, for the wrong reasons, the title to me held great promise. And it turned out to be, this wonderful story. The medical element is minor, but the character in the book has a lot of bad breaks all along. Clubfoot, he's orphaned. But there's a moment when he arrives on the wards, and Somerset Maugham describes it as something like this. Philip saw humanity there in the rough, the artist's canvas, and he said to himself, this is something I can do. This is something I can be good at. And those words just, struck me. It was almost like, it just felt surreal, like you were listening to a voice that was just for you. And and I took away from that the sense that not everybody can be a brilliant mathematician like my brother, or a brilliant whatever artist or something, but anybody with a curiosity about the human condition and a willingness to work hard could turn out to be a good physician. And so I just felt like I'd found my place, in a world where
Hmm.
all around me were these super achievers. I'd found something that I could do that would be satisfying and credible. And yeah, so that was the first kind of steering of the ship. But there were many more along the way. For example, I began to train in infectious diseases in Boston in 1984, 85, and there was a lot of HIV around.
Mm-hmm.
It was just starting, and I read Randy Schill's book, And the Band Played On. And
Hmm.
I mean, I'd already known this, and I was already spending most of my time in that area, but I suddenly thought that this is the defining moment of our generation, both as physicians and as human beings. And I sort of pivoted my entire clinical activity towards that. So, I mean, there've been many examples like that, some of them more
Yeah.
minor, but some significant.
I mean, what you just did, quoting a book, maybe perhaps slightly not an exact quote, but unless it was an exact quote, I don't know. I didn't Google it. Um, but there's somebody out there, whether it's right now or 10 years from now or 40 years from now, who will do the same thing with your words. They will have read a book that changed their life of yours, that propelled them to do something different, whether it's become a writer or become a physician or who knows what, and quote a piece of you. How does that feel?
It feels, I mean, it's hard to imagine, but it feels great. I will say that a generation of physicians my age would describe their call to medicine. The calling to medicine came from a book, and it was
Hmm.
often the same book. In America, the book was Arrowsmith by Sinclair Lewis,
Mm.
Oh,
or it
interesting.
was Microbe Hunting by Paul de Kruif. But in the Commonwealth, it was The Citadel by A.J. Cronin,
Huh.
which was a huge bestseller here too. But the
Yeah.
reason people don't remember him, they don't invoke his name much. But that book, The Citadel, was responsible for the creation of the National Health Service.
Mm.
Because it so captured the public's imagination and caused outrage about the fictional portrayal of medical conditions in a small Welsh mining town. And nevertheless, it was the lie that tells the truth. It was real enough. And so the
Hmm.
NHS was born. And so my goal with my very first novel, not my first book, but my first novel, Cutting for Stone, was to write something that, a young reader, not young in age, but a reader might say, you know what, I don't care how hard medicine is. I don't care how much money I'm going to make. I can't imagine something more adventurous and romantic than a life in medicine. And so that was the ambition, to write that kind of
Mm.
book. And to this day, the best kind of praise I get for the one that I value the most, for both Cutting for Stone and Covenant, is someone telling me that I decided to go to medical school, or
Hmm.
I went to medical school and they're, now they have gray hair even, but it was because of my book. And to me, that's more valuable than any prize or riches. Really, it's really something very
Wow.
special.
That's very cool. And in turn, you're not only changing their lives, but you're changing the lives of the people that they're affecting as well, which
Yeah,
is
it's funny you should say
the
that.
ripple effect is big.
I've been a long time teacher of medicine, which is to say that I teach at the bedside. I don't do many lectures and so on, but
Mm.
it's a remarkably inefficient way to teach. You're seeing patients with 3 or 4 interns or residents around. And however, if you do your job well and you impart and model a kind of way of being in medicine, I always think it's just when I'm getting tired of having said the same thing again to, over 40 years, to the same young student in front of me, I remind myself that they're going to go on to a lifetime of seeing patients. And if I do this one thing well with them, and they carry a piece of it forward, just as I carry in me all the aphorisms of my professors. I mean, I'm literally parroting things my professor said to me. I'm parroting to my students. They don't necessarily know it, but it's part of that chain that you pass on. So I think what you just said echoed that sense of, it may not be very efficient, but it's terribly important.
That makes me think of when I finished the book, what I was really struck by was how patient the book itself is. I think the storytelling is very patient, and your patience as a writer comes through as well, because from what I've read, this took quite a bit of time for you to write. And I can only imagine the kind of endurance that it took to pull off a book that is this epic. And so many times when I'm writing, I don't know if you get this, you get so far into it and you just think, I need to back out. This isn't going to go well, and it's sometimes hard to know when to continue. So I'm wondering, what was it that sustained you as you were writing this book? Was there something that kept you going as you were working?
Yeah, I mean, there were moments of great despair. I mean, I think moments when I thought this would never happen. And part of it was I just got into the story, and I tend to write long, I think. Mm-hmm. I just felt that I needed 3 generations to especially to echo something that I love about medicine. In my years of practicing medicine, it's been remarkable to see things that for which we had a name but no understanding evolve to where we had a better sort of cellular understanding of what was going on, then a molecular understanding, and finally even a treatment, a small molecule or a RNA treatment. That kind of evolution requires 3 generations for you to see it, and I wanted to make that happen in the book. And so I was committed to 3 generations. And I feel like I can't make a character come alive in a 1 or 2 page sketch of them. I mean, I can try, but it's not easy. And so it wound up being much longer than I intended. And there was an issue. I actually changed publishers because my first publisher was just focused entirely on the length. And the wonderful thing when I met Peter Blackstock at Grove Publishers was he said, a book needs to be as long as it needs to be. It's like, wow, I can. So I don't think that I'm particularly patient. I'm not sure I would have even embarked on this if I thought it would be such an ordeal. I think it just, you look back and everything seems to link up, and people project on you this master plan you had, but I had no wish to go through this quite the way it happened. It was 10 years in the making.
Wow.
And a lot of,
I also appreciate that you have said multiple times now, a lot of things people will ask you about is what's next. And so many authors who I've talked to, I'm just like, I couldn't imagine writing another book after Covenant of Water. Like, I appreciated that you have sort of put out into the world, you put all of your heart and soul into that. And if something comes, but the goal is not necessarily to write another book. So just sharing that appreciation.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I also can't get my head around the idea of another book, especially if it's going to be, that much of an effort.
Yeah.
I'm getting on in years, and another 10 years, I'm not sure. On the other hand, I think gradually that argument is fading, and I'm kicking around that idea. So we'll see. I would like to make it shorter. I wouldn't want to.
A little novella, perhaps.
Do a multi-generation thing.
Do you have a piece of advice for any writers that is kind of stuck in the middle? Because I think every writer, like you said, you hit that moment of despair and you just wonder, I don't know if I'm ever going to finish. I don't know if anyone will ever read it. Do you have any words of wisdom?
Yeah, I think one thing is to not give up too soon. And I think I take that lesson from startups. We have a ton of startups around here, and I've probably sunk money that I didn't need to into my students' startups. Just they're going to be the next Google or the next something, But there's a very common graph that I've seen on several people use where, there's a time when you invest in the company and then it sort of is going down. And then there's a point where it goes up again. But you don't, when you're going down and you're at the same level as the place where you're going up, you don't know whether you're going up or down. You see, and so you have to sort of weather that little trough, not knowing if you're actually on the downslope heading for the pit or if you're on the comeback, because they look the same.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing is. And so I think there's a similar phenomenon in writing a novel, I think, where despair is expected. You're like the startup and sales aren't good right away. You have to push through and have a finished manuscript, put it aside for a while perhaps, and then come back to it and make a judgment.
Good advice.
Yeah, that's scary to think about. Not even being able to see if you're going up or going down, but it's having that patience to work through.
I think that's where a good editor comes in, because you quickly lose objectivity about the story. And, I had, believe it or not, I had many, many more pages that didn't make it into the book. And it's not all bad writing, but it's just that they weren't serving the arc of the book and the main characters. So we eliminated characters who, to me, were pretty fascinating. But I had to agree with Peter that they didn't really... they added to the story, but not in a way that was necessary. And so,
is there a character or a plot point in particular that is meaningful to you that's worth sharing?
Well, for example, Uplift Master had a much bigger story.
He's my favorite.
Amy Jo's favorite character.
He had a much bigger story, and it was, to me, it was interesting. We wind up putting all our little pet peeves and interests into these characters, and I think he was full of them. And I think I only show a fraction of his whole self, but he really is an ancillary character, and I had to accept that for that to work.
Well, if you ever wanted to write a novella about Uplift Master, I would read it. I just thought, especially at the Merriman convention, and part of that is because my mother-in-law has told me stories about going to this convention. So I loved that section, and I loved his ambition for the town. And I love it when ambition really takes on something that doesn't necessarily have to do with money, but it's like for the good of the village, the good of the people. So he was just really fun to read. Do you have a favorite character?
I'm sorry. Do I have a favorite? No, I think the character I feel closest to is Philippos for some reason. I think he has more of me, but there was an interesting review of the book by the New York Times, by Andrew Solomon. He reviewed my novel, and it was generally a very positive review, but at one place he says that I don't have any bad characters in my book. They're all good. They're all, and I suppose in a way that's kind of true, but it also fits my worldview. I feel like most of us are, we don't wake up and say, I'm evil, so I'm going to go out and fulfill my evil agenda. Even the most villainous people we know, some of whom are very prominent right now in the media, certainly don't think of themselves as evil. They everybody feels very justified in what they're doing. And
that's where the scariest villain comes in.
Yeah, so there's the true villain. There are very few of those. And in my novel, I tried to populate it with people who were trying to do good. They'd often made terrible mistakes, and they were looking for redemption. And I think, again, that echoes with most of the people I know in the world who are, on that spectrum. So, but Philippos was someone I was very identified with closely. Some of his confusion, and similarly, I think I was very close to all the characters. And when they died, every time I was revising, it didn't matter if it was the 100th time, I would be in tears at that scene.
You should have seen me in this Instagram chat every week. I'm typing in another one. How did he kill off another person? I was very upset every week, Abraham. But I get it. It's a part of life. It's a part of life.
The thing is that I think we are so unused to death in modern society. And we're in denial. We're in major denial. We know it's happening, but in the era I was describing, it was actually commonplace. I had
Mm-hmm.
one of my grandmothers lost her only son to typhoid at 12, my mother's favorite brother. And my other grandmother lost her oldest son, who was 16, to rabies when he fended off a dog who wandered into the compound. And my dad remembers as a child that he got bit, and a month later he had this raging encephalitis and died, and they took him to the hospital
Wow.
and they sent him right back. So this kind of death was, not something I'm making up in some ghoulish way. I think it was
Mhm.
true to the times.
I know. I didn't blame you. You were doing justice to the storytelling, I understand, but I had to blame you. You were the person I had to blame. To get sort of nitty-gritty into pieces of the story, Ravi tells Digby, "Small things make a big difference, Digby. God is in the small things." What are some small things in your life?
In my life that make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's during patient care. I think for me, the thing that gets glossed over, but I think it's very important, is listening to the story. The story will often have the clues to what's going on if it's not evident. So similarly, you can jump straight to the CAT scan, but I like to really use the information, the phenotypic data that the patient's body is giving you. You have to learn to read the body. And for many in medicine, it's like, well, I'll just get a CAT scan. But if you take the information from the body plus the CAT scan, you are reaching a sort of a higher level of understanding. Or you're asking better questions of the tests you order, or you're avoiding tests you don't need because, you're an idiot and you have missed what's written on the body. You're sort of medically illiterate. So to me, when I think of the small things, it's that kind of thing. But it also could extend to things like, courtesy, listening. It's a small thing, but I think the real art of conversation is to listen. And there are far too many people who are busy talking, so they're never listening. And you really can't have a fruitful conversation. I've had people say to me, "It was so nice chatting with you." And I realized I didn't get a word in. But it didn't matter to them because they're busy going on, and I'm a good listener, so I listen.
It was so nice talking at you.
No pressure. I'm not putting pressure.
Those are great answers.
I was just going to say, something else I noticed, and even in chatting with you throughout the book, each death that happens, we just feel it right in the chest. But I think you also approach tragedy from a very soul settled place. It almost feels like there's this bird's eye view of it, but at the same time, we are really in it with the characters and we feel them holding their breath and everything. And the characters, to me, they all really know how to lament very well, which is, I think, something we don't do well in this country. And they don't pity themselves. But they also really know how to access humor and joy right in the same moment. And I'm wondering how you find that balance as a writer, because those are my favorite books, the ones that you feel the sadness, but you also feel the joy. And I think not only as it's hard in life, it's also hard in writing. So I'm curious what that journey is like for you.
Well, I'm sure very much like you, there's a lot of trial and error, many iterations, and sometimes you're overdoing it and it's melodramatic and it's full of, pathos, or worse, it's become tawdry. I always love this image that I first learned in Iowa, I believe. Yeah, it was in Iowa, from Frank Conroy, who was the program director. He said, where does a book exist? It's not, where does the covenant of water exist? It doesn't exist in those pages in front of me here, but it exists as a collaborative venture between the writer and the reader. So the writer provides the words, the reader provides their imagination, and in middle space, this, fictional dream, this movie version evolves, and it's very much the creation of the reader. And the reader is going to be really upset if you give them too much information because then you rob them of the ability to imagine. Conversely, if you give them too little, then it's mysterious. They don't know what the hell you're talking about. And so I think especially in the emotional scenes, it's important to, as best you can, trust the reader to fill in the spaces and imagine parts of the scene that you're not describing and experience the emotions that you've only given a shorthand for. And again, as I said, I think editors should have their names on the cover, because it really takes someone like that to say, this is too much, this is too little. I have a hard time seeing that in my own work unless I put it aside, completely aside, for a long time. I mean, I can pick up something I wrote 2 years ago and be much more objective about it. I can't do that with something I put away 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Which is why it infuriates me when someone from time to time will send me something saying, I just wrote this morning. What do you think of it? I want to say, I'm thinking I want to come over there and smack you. I'm going to draw for you. There is no writing to me that works like that, where you wrote it this morning. It needs to mature, like fine wine, I suppose.
There's not even good news coverage that happens that way.
That's true.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, I have another very specific personal question related to the book for you. Tangama talks about how if there was ever a fire in her house and she had to choose between her husband and her clay pot where she cooks everything, she would choose her clay pot. What is your clay pot?
These days everything's in the clouds. I wouldn't have to grab the
Right.
I think it would be my Gibson Les Paul Studio, the middle one of those three there.
Oh, wow.
I would grab that and be out of here.
Do you write music?
No, not at all. I don't even play music well. I just pretend and have illusions of being on a stage and being great, which will never happen.
How dare you? You just put it out into the universe. The next thing we know, you're going to be playing some concert somewhere.
No, trust me, it's never going to happen. I just like noodling around. And the amazing thing is, when I picked up guitar when I was young, and I played bass guitar in a band for a while, but it was so hard to learn, especially in Africa. And then, and nowadays with YouTube and this and that, it's easy to learn. And I'm enjoying learning some music theory and understanding why these things work. But nobody ever gets to hear it, and nobody ever will. I wouldn't do that.
I played bass guitar in a band once, he says.
Did you? Oh.
No, you said that.
Yeah, but it wasn't like a major band of any kind of thing. It was just a small band,
It's more than the band I was in, which was not, I wasn't in a band.
There is something nice about, I think, when you're writing a long project and you're kind of in it, there's something nice about having a fellow creative project, whether it's guitar or sewing or even cooking dinner, where you can sort of, there's markers about, okay, the song starts here and it ends here. I can it sounds a little bit better than it did yesterday. I cooked this meal and I ate it. To just remind yourself that I'm in the middle of an arc here. There is a cycle here, and to sort of see a smaller one can, I think, be very encouraging, especially as your brain is trying to work something out. It's nice to have that other creative outlet available.
Yes, well said. I agree.
Do you mind if I ask why the guitar specifically?
There's nothing really much value other than that in the house right now, I don't think.
It doesn't have to be, like, it could be sentimental. Like the clay pot, I'm sure Tangaman could have gotten, and it just was that one specifically was important to her.
I haven't shared this with very many people, but I walked out of this house one night 15 years ago. It was a very painful parting from my then wife. My son was in tears, couldn't understand what was happening. And it all had happened fairly precipitously, and I called a taxi, and I grabbed this guitar, and the other thing I did grab was some papers, valuable papers. If for whatever reason I didn't have access again, and the house at the time was full of all kinds of things that we must have spent money on.
Sure,
there wasn't a single one that I missed. And when I moved, eventually for complicated reasons, I got the house. I moved back into the house, and I'm sitting in the living room, which to me was the most useless room in the house because it had this expensive furniture covered with the lace dollies or whatever, and nobody ever sat there. And so I made this my writing space. There's a big whiteboard on this wall, great windows here. And so I mean, I've accumulated a lot of crap here, but there's nothing that including the guitar, that I couldn't walk away from.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Not at all.
Every once in a while, I'll ask a question like that, and then the author will turn it back around on me. And I am glad that you didn't do that, because I have no idea. I don't know what I would grab. My passport? Right? Like, I have no idea.
That would be a smart thing. I should have said passport.
That's okay. Amy Jo, do you have something that you would have grabbed? Like, I have no idea.
I have some strong associations with this guitar, and so I think that's why it would be hard to replace. I'd probably walk out with that. Sorry, you were going to say.
I think, and this is sort of silly, but there's not silly, but my children have drawn pictures of me that I have up on the wall. That's something that feels like, I might just take with me if the house is burning down or something like that. But it's interesting when you're kind of up against it. Like, well, I'm not sure if I need anything really, other than the people in it,
Right. Yeah. Assuming that the people, the pets, and the cloud are all with you. Though, now that I'm thinking about it, in my closet, I have my childhood blanket. It was the blanket that I was wrapped in as a newborn. Really? My very first photo of me is wrapped in this blanket.
Yeah.
I used to sleep with it every day as a child, and now it's like folded up in my closet somewhere. I'd probably grab that now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Just sentimentally, right? Like, it's like a thing that you just can never, ever replace. Anyway.
The other thing I'm thinking now that what would I really grab is I have on my bookshelf galleys of each of my books there. And it's not even the galley that I want, but I have written notes to myself that are in the book that are kind of reminders to myself about how I want to be when I'm talking about that book. Because, I think when you're with readers or whoever, you always want to bring your most honest self. So in each one of those books, depending on whatever I was going through at the time or whatever the book meant to me, I just have this list of things that remind me, like, this is why I wrote this book. This is why I feel it's important. And it's a snapshot of maybe who I was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, but it's just those sorts of things, like a letter to myself that I will reread every once in a while when I feel like I need to get my head on straight a little bit. So I'd probably grab that too.
That's lovely. I think ultimately, I'm very conscious that you can't take anything with you.
Right.
And I think we live in this illusion that we're somehow going to keep it all and take it with us.
Yeah.
And, in all likelihood, our kids are going to walk in and cuss us for having accumulated so much junk and the number of trucks they have to haul to the dumpster. And so I'm consciously trying to accumulate less. Not that I have accumulated much from it,
But as authors, the two of you do leave things behind. You do leave a legacy. While you don't take it with you, there is a piece of you that will be a part of the written word as long as humans are existing. And that's a really cool and special thing, and something something worth acknowledging.
Yeah, I don't know.
Leaving a part of yourself.
I don't think about that a lot. Do you think about that?
No, I don't.
Yeah. It's a nice thought when it comes up, but it's certainly not. It's not giving me any consolation about dying. I'll tell you
that. You said earlier that when you read a book, it's like stopping time, and that when I write is exactly why I write. Is that I feel like that's the closest I'll ever get to stopping time. So it helps me sort of really put myself in the present of whatever's happening in the book.
Yeah. Wonderful.
I guess what I really meant is, like, you might have a lot of crap, but there is legacy that you get to leave behind as well. Not that it will help you sleep at night, but
no, I think it's true. I think part of our sense of purpose is fulfilled when we feel like we did something that lasts. But
yeah.
yeah.
Speaking of dying, all right, because we could talk about all the spoilers we want because everyone has read the book. Why / did you know / the fact that Big Amachi and Baby Mal died the same night? Why did you do that? Did you know that was going to happen? Can you talk a bit about the fact that it happened together?
I wish I could explain the why or the how, but I think that, to me, writing is pretty mysterious. You sit down, you have to apply your ass to the chair, and then at some point, and it's not very often, from some place that you don't know, call it the right brain or the muse or God, something tells you to do this, and it's hard to even remember the exact moment when you thought that, but somehow it came up. I mean, like the ending of the book, which I won't say what that is until you tell me to, but that came 6-7 years into the book. I didn't.
Wow.
Once you see that, then you can go back and, so that was a profound insight. And Big Amashi and Baby Mol dying together I must have been trying to write one of their deaths, and then I thought, this would be a big moment if they went together, which is actually quite uncommon for that to really happen.
I mean, it's literally what happened with this is my COVID brain. Carrie Fisher and what's her face? Debbie Reynolds. Debbie Reynolds died the day after Carrie Fisher.
Were they
basically from? I'm sorry.
Were they best friends or something?
Debbie Reynolds is
Abraham Verghese.
Is Carrie
I'll
Fisher's
let you
mother.
take this one.
Yeah.
Debbie. Yes, it was mother-daughter.
Oh, sorry. Forgive me. Yeah.
That's okay.
That's mother-daughter. Yes, obviously.
Yeah. Debbie Reynolds died 2 days after her daughter, and I think, for lack of you're the doctor in the room, but I think heartbreak was a major piece of it.
I forgot that Debbie Reynolds was her mother. Yeah.
Right? I know.
Interesting.
But that it's sort of, I'm only thinking about this now. I wasn't in the moment thinking, oh, this reminds me of Debbie Reynolds, Carrie Fisher. But now it's like, oh, it doesn't actually seem as crazy as an idea.
And maybe it wasn't a good example of the muse speaking. It might have just been a very conscious decision, like, if this person's going to die and this person's going to die, maybe you can create something by them dying at the same moment. So, and then once I did that, then it just felt very rich. And a better example to me, the muse speaking is when you're, you think you have an outline for the book. So this whiteboard has what I thought was the outline for the book. And, but very often I would begin writing and then you would.
Oh my God.
Discover that.
That's beautiful.
Wow.
I tend to think visually, so it helps me, but it didn't help me. So, I mean, I would plot only to find that, you would come to this moment. So there's an aphorism in writing that character is determined by decisions taken under pressure. So, you can describe a character, give them dialogue, or you do whatever you want. But ultimately, what defines a character is what they might do in a certain critical moment. And so I would be putting my characters under certain kinds of pressures and with the intention of going this way, but they would reveal a new aspect of character to me by saying they're not going that way, they're going here, And so where does that come from? I had planned something else, and they seem to be revealing to me they're not going there, they're going here. And to me, those examples are rare, but to me, they are the muse speaking. And you find very striking parallel examples in science. Mendeleev and the periodic table. He was struggling with how do you arrange these elements, and he had a dream where he saw these cards stacked in rows, and the guy who invented PCR technology was either on an acid trip or a post-acid trip, and he could see the snake chasing its tail. And so I'm a big believer that we're just scratching the surface in all our conscious action. There's so much happening at a deeper level, and it comes out from time to time. And writing, I think, is a great way to allow it to come out.
What do you do with that whiteboard? You can't erase it. Are you going to erase it?
Well, this is like the 7th or 8th iteration of it. So when the character departed from this, I would just take a photograph, erase it, and then or redraw parts of it. But at a certain point, it's decoration is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I feel you should like get like glass screwed onto it or something and hang it up like art. It's beautiful.
I'm actually debating on how do I preserve this, because maybe one of your listeners will know, but it's basically, a whiteboard with markers, and the slightest touch and it wipes right off. So
I feel like you need to take like a fiberglass and drill it in over the top of it, so then it could be preserved.
A clear plexiglass.
Yeah.
But
plexiglass, not fiberglass. Yeah.
It falls into the category of, if there's a fire, I'd leave this behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's good at least in the meantime, it won't get, smudged or erased.
When you look at that, what do you feel when you look at your whiteboard?
It feels the kind of nostalgic, because it's been in this form for almost, the book has been out over a year, and it's been maybe 3 or 4 years before that when I finally gave up trying to keep track of it. But at the very least, I think it was a way of organizing my thoughts. Some of the ways that I see the characters in my head, which would probably be very different from the way the reader sees them. I think we all make our own mental images. It's part of those 2 arcs of writer and reader meeting. But to me, because this was a whiteboard and I could just literally erase a mark, I could keep fiddling with the face until it approached whatever it was I had in my head. So it was useful in that sense. It's a good discussion point when people come to the house. They're not very...
I imagine though too, it could be a good cleanse if you wanted to like light some candles, get some sage, and like have an erasing ceremony when you need to like
I think I like that better than plexiglass.
Invite Oprah. You'll all do you could do like a beautiful prayer and see it off into the world. I feel like there are so many things that we could keep talking to you about. There's something that comes up a lot in the book, in your conversations that you've had with Oprah and other podcasts that you've been on. I listen to a lot of Abraham Verghese content. But something that comes up a lot is the difference between being cured and being healed. How, as a doctor, as a literary author, how would you say we should be thinking about these concepts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, life is a terminal condition, where none of us is going to survive. So in that sense, you begin there. By the way, that line is from John Irving, from The World According to Garp. Life is a terminal condition. But I lost my train of thought there, but,
talking about being cured and being healed.
So I think that it's a fact of life that we don't always just erase a disease. Some of them we do. We just completely cure people. But I like the analogy of when pneumonia was treated by Western physicians in the old days before antibiotics. You examine the patient by, percussing their lungs and listening to their lungs, and then you prescribed poultices and inhalations and whatnot. And if the Native American physician or medicine man saw the patient, they also had their own way of examination. They had their own, heuristic to come up with pneumonia or the equivalent, and then they would begin their chants and potions and incantations. And when penicillin came along, it was like a magical drug. You didn't need any poultices or this and that. You just gave penicillin, and the bacterium pneumococcus is exquisitely sensitive to it. And so effectively what Western medicine did is give the penicillin and step away. Whereas a Native American physician, this is like an analogy I'm using, got the penicillin but continued with the chants and the potions and the incantations, recognizing that there's more to this than just, it's a pneumococcus, left lung pneumonia. Okay, got it. That you've been violated in some way. And the example that I have used often, and you probably have heard, that I give to my students is, if you go home after rounds today, and you find that your apartment door is open, even though you locked it, and you find that the lock is in shambles on the floor, and then you go inside and everything's strewn around and all your valuables are gone, at that point you'll feel violated. You'll feel a sense of loss, not just of physical stuff or material stuff that was precious to you, but you also have a sense of spiritual violation. Someone came into your sacred space and violated it. And if the police come by in an hour and say, "We caught the person who did this, here's your stuff back," at that moment you're cured, but you're not healed. Your sense of violation will be so strong, you might choose to leave that apartment and be somewhere else. So I think all illness has those components. You hurt your knee and you have a big swelling, and then you're told you need a knee replacement or something, and your reaction is, why me? Why now? That's sort of the spiritual thing you feel, whereas objectively it's, you have chronic osteoarthritis of your knee. This is your third arthroscopy, and there's not much cartilage left. But I think there's always these two dimensions, and with diseases like cancer or HIV, the sense of spiritual violation is huge. And for some of them, there may not be, or there aren't enough treatment options. So there are many occasions when you have to. It doesn't mean you just walk away and say, "Sorry, but I can't do anything for you." I think our presence, our willingness to share the journey as best we can, it matters. It's a kind of healing, which to me is a coming to terms with whatever is in store.
Yeah.
You can do that alone, but it's better to do it. It's better to have someone, if you're sick, in the medical profession who's going to make that journey with you, because we have a lot of fears and uncertainties.
With the condition in the book, the fact that a cure is learned later in the book doesn't mean that the history has been healed.
Exactly, yeah. To this day, people who live with that condition, yes, technically there's a cure, but it's comes with a price. It's either surgery or radiation, and and so there's all kinds of agonizing decisions before or after. You're never free of the violation, so to speak.
Yeah. Unrelated, but we'll talk about the ending in 1 second. When Oprah was shocked that Philippos wasn't Mariama's father, I was like, girl, were you close reading? Come on. Abraham did a beautiful job making sure that was very clear. So I just wanted to say that. The second thing, when you said the ending came to you 6 years into writing the book, can you share what you felt when you realized Elsie was alive?
Well, I felt enormous. I knew that she was alive. I wasn't quite sure what form she'd come back, but I felt enormous relief, because then I could, once I knew exactly what had happened to her and how all these balls I'd thrown in the air would now come down in an organized fashion, and all the threads tied together, it was a relief. I felt like now I can go back from the ending and make sure everything is lining up towards that. You can't really have more than one or two dramatic endings. You can have one. It's part of the reason why Uplift Master, big chunks of him were sacrificed because that wasn't the ending was this one.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't need his mini drama to take that many pages. Yes, it's profound when it happens. And as I embark on another book, if I do, I guess I'm never going to be someone who has the whole thing outlined and knows where it's going to go. I'm going to trust this unconscious process, whatever it is, this process of having a vague idea and pushing on. But I worry, what if the muse doesn't speak? What if you don't get the insight that you need? Well, you'll have a pretty dull book, I would imagine.
Yeah. The relief that probably washed over you too was, okay, I can end the book now.
Yes, indeed.
It's all coming together. Man, I mean, the book is beautiful and talks about so many things. And I think, hearing you share again what you share with your students about being cured and being healed with the relation to the breaking into your home is like the tip of the iceberg in terms of what this has made me think about. I mean, you could see the tabs and the lines, and I've written myself questions inside, and all of so many things have come out of this book. I'm sure everyone has said to you they could sit and talk to you for hours and hours, and you are both a great speaker and a great listener. So thank you for that.
Very, very kind. I hope your other participants in the discussion have all their questions answered too. Are you the conduit for their questions?
Yes, I am the conduit. Let's see. Is there anything that we didn't really get to ask? Those were a few. One in particular. Oh, back to the books at the beginning that we were talking about. Someone asked, in the book you weave references to Moby Dick and Great Expectations, and I will add Alice in Wonderland, into Koshi Star's teaching Philippos. Could you discuss how you chose those books to include in particular, and if you wanted to include more than that but needed to edit them out?
Yeah, I mean, those are books that I've liked, and I think Moby Dick especially was a tribute to my friend John Irving, who really has loves the book and has had several references, allusions to it in his novels, and in a funny way, this was an allusion to him indirectly. Only he would know. But I could have picked, many other books, I suppose. But in terms of what was available and popular in India, and what I read as a child, those would be the books.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you've also talked about your mentors having read fiction and how important fiction is and how much of a champion of books you are, obviously. But just on behalf of authors, I thank you for championing the work that you all do. And thank you for your time.
Oh, that's all. Pleasure.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure to meet both of you, truly. And this is the most relaxed interview I think I've ever had.
Okay.
Perfect. Can I put that on a blurb somewhere? So funny. And also, just to say, I think so many people feel very pigeonholed into one thing. As you said early on, culturally, if you weren't a doctor or a lawyer, you were a failure. And I think that for me, I'm not a journalist. I was barely a reader 3 years ago, and now I'm hosting and producing a book podcast, which was shocking to me. My background is in theater. When COVID hit, theater disappeared forever in my mind, and a lot of pivoting happened. And I think the idea of starting something new, doing something different, getting inspired by new and different things, and allowing yourself to be a doctor and be a writer and be a musician and be a parent is really inspiring. So just I want to thank you for that as well, and being an example of there's more to us than we realize, and we can embark on those journeys.
Well said.
It was fun. Good luck to you both, and I'll be looking for your next books.
Thank you, Abraham. Have a great rest of your day.
He's amazing. It's the feeling I had reading the book where it feels like this honest, welcome, open space that really looks at tragedy, but yet also has this lightness about it, is exactly what I felt talking to him. I think that's such a special thing when you meet a writer and you can see the connections. I don't know what it was about this book in particular, but I just felt like as I was reading, it felt like it was written by somebody who's really walked through something difficult or many difficult things. And it was from that this story came out. So getting to talk to him was a real once in a lifetime thing. So I'm grateful to you for that.
I'm grateful to you. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I know that was so special. And I could have talked to him all day about anything.
I know. You feel like you could tell him your life story. And that's another thing too, is that you feel like you can tell he's a good listener. And it's this act of listening, I think, that makes him a good writer and probably an excellent physician as well. So all those things, and a musician, all those things kind of coming together.
I know. The best. I have health anxiety, and when I go to a doctor and I feel listened to and not condescended to and not infantilized, and like they just hear me and agree that we're sort of on a journey together.
Oh my God.
Which sounds like so that's the kind of doctor he would be.
He said that. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
Was there anything that you wanted to publicly say about the book?
Just that I feel so lucky that it came to me at this point. And I appreciated also what he said about not giving up too soon, because you can tell when you read a book like this that just the ambition for taking on something like that, it's not going to come without moments of doubt and times when, even hearing him say he had to switch publishers and stuff. I mean, that sort of thing is just devastating for a writer. And you think the best is behind me. I'm never going to work again. I was foolish for starting this. And it can be so hard to dig yourself out of that hole. But I think what he proved was that there's something about digging out of that hole that kind of ends up making the book what it is. So I don't know. I just, as a writer and as a human, I appreciate that. And I feel like I needed that. And I didn't know I needed it. Yeah. How about you?
And he also didn't sacrifice the book. He wasn't like, okay, let me cut it in half.
And that pressure can feel real sometimes when you have people and you think, well, they must know more than I do about, that pressure is very real for sure. So sounds like he found an amazing editor, which is also the best feeling when you have somebody that can put their finger on something and just let you fly. That's the best feeling in the world. So I'm glad he found that.
Yeah, no, amazing. No, for me, I think it's funny because reading the book and listening to the audiobook, I guess, and listening to so much content of his, I feel like I know him. So I think, again, it was like I could sit and talk to him about anything. So his warmth was very palpable, and I was grateful for that. But thank you for being on this journey with me. This was so fun.
I think we should do it again sometime. I loved it.
We should.
It was, probably the best thing about my reading project this year with Big Books is realizing how fun it is to read it with a friend. So thank you for being part of that. And thank you to all the other people, your listeners who joined in. It was really fun.
So fun.
Goodbye, my friend. Until next time.
Goodbye. Until next time.